I met Claire in college, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was different. She was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying, confident, effortlessly beautiful, and always the center of attention in any room. But she wasn't just attractive, she was sharp, witty, and had this magnetic energy that made you feel like the most important person in the world when she focused on you. That's what drew me in, and once I was in, there was no turning back. We got married young, right after graduation. I had landed a decent job in finance, while Claire pursued her passion in marketing, climbing the corporate ladder with a mix of intelligence and charisma that made her a rising star. Our life together felt perfect. We were that couple, the one others envied, the one friends pointed to as proof that love could be both passionate and enduring. We traveled together, hosted dinner parties, made ambitious plans for the future. I thought we were building something unshakable. But in hindsight, I see now that Claire was always someone who needed more. More excitement, more attention, more validation. In the beginning, that need worked in my favor. She craved me, my affection, my presence. But over time, as the thrill of new love faded into the routine of married life, I think she started searching for that feeling elsewhere. I just didn't see it then. Or maybe I didn't want to. The cracks started appearing subtly. Late nights at work became more frequent, texts went unanswered longer than usual, and her phone, which used to be an afterthought in our home, became something she never let out of her sight. I told myself I was imagining things, that stress from her job was wearing her down, that our occasional arguments were nothing out of the ordinary. Every marriage had rough patches, right? Even when Claire started bringing up the idea of taking a girls' trip, I didn't think much of it. She'd never gone on one before, always claiming that work was too busy or that she preferred traveling with me. So when she announced that she and her friends were planning a week-long vacation at a beach resort, I saw it as a positive thing. Maybe some time away would help her relax, come back recharged, and bring us closer again. I had no idea that this trip would be the beginning of the end. Claire threw herself into planning the trip with an energy I hadn't seen from her in months. She and her friends texted constantly, exchanging hotel links, discussing flight times, debating which bikinis to bring. I'd never seen her so excited about something that didn't involve me, but I told myself it was good for her. She deserved to have fun. In the weeks leading up to her departure, I started noticing changes in her behavior. She seemed happier, more engaged in conversation, but not with me. When we sat on the couch at night, she wasn't scrolling through social media like she used to. She was glued to her messages, smiling at her phone in a way that made my stomach turn. I didn't want to be the jealous husband. I had always prided myself on trusting her, on not being the type to snoop or interrogate. But there was something about the way she had started carrying herself, the way she glanced at me with something almost resembling guilt before quickly looking away, that made me uneasy. The night before she left, I watched her pack her suitcase. She laid out new dresses, ones I'd never seen before, ones that were a little tighter, a little shorter than the clothes she usually wore. She had bought new lingerie too, I noticed, the kind that wasn't meant to be worn alone in a hotel room with just her friends. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask her why she suddenly cared so much about how she looked for a trip that was supposed to be about relaxing with the girls. But instead I bit my tongue. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I just didn't want to know the answer. On the morning of her departure, Claire kissed me goodbye at the door, her lips brushing mine lightly, distantly. I told her to have fun, and she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I stood in the doorway and watched as she got into the Uber, her phone already in her hand, fingers moving quickly over the screen. And then she was gone. I tried to shake off the unease, to focus on work, to remind myself that I was just being insecure. But deep down, something inside me was already whispering the truth. I just wasn't ready to hear it yet. The first few days after Claire left, I kept myself busy, convincing myself that everything was fine. She sent me pictures of the resort, smiling with her friends, lounging by the pool, drinking cocktails with tiny umbrellas. Her texts were short but sweet, little messages in between her activities that reassured me she was having a good time. At night she'd send a quick. She was supposed to be enjoying herself, relaxing, escaping the stress of work. I even felt guilty for my initial suspicions. I had let paranoia get the best of me. I needed to trust her. But no matter how much I tried to push the thoughts away, there was something gnawing at me, something that wouldn't let me fully settle. By the fourth day, Claire's messages had become less frequent, her updates fewer and far between. The pictures stopped altogether. She had always been someone who checked in, someone who would send little texts just to let me know she was thinking of me. Now I was the one reaching out, waiting hours for a reply that would come in the form of a vague, dismissive response. Just hanging out. Or, heading out for dinner, I'll text you later. But later never came. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that she was just having fun, that I didn't need to keep tabs on her every move. But the silence was unsettling, a stark contrast to how she had been before the trip. Even her social media had gone quiet, no posts, no stories, nothing but a strange, empty void where there used to be constant updates. That night, something happened that sent my heart straight into my stomach. It was almost midnight when I instinctively checked my phone and noticed something strange. Claire's location was off. We had shared locations for years. It was never something we talked about, never something we questioned. It was just there, an unspoken assurance that we always knew where the other was. But now, for the first time, it was gone. The words, "Location not available," glared at me from the screen, and I felt my breath hitch. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe there was an issue with the signal. Maybe she had accidentally turned it off. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but the unease I had been trying to suppress for days clawed its way back to the surface. I opened Instagram, scrolling through her friends' stories, searching for any sign of her, anything to reassure myself that I was overthinking. And then I saw it. It was a short, shaky video, the kind people post when they're out drinking, a blurry pan across a crowded nightclub. Flashing neon lights pulsed in the background, music so loud I could practically feel the bass vibrating through the screen. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, people dancing, just another wild night out. At first, it seemed harmless, just a typical vacation clip. But then, in the middle of the chaos, my eyes locked onto something that made my stomach drop. There, caught in a split-second frame, was Claire. Not sitting at a table with her friends, not laughing over drinks, not posing for pictures. She was on the dance floor, wrapped in the arms of a man I didn't recognize, moving against him in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. His hands gripped her hips, pulling her close, her body pressed against his as they swayed together, their faces inches apart. She was smiling, lost in the moment, oblivious to the fact that she had been captured, however briefly, in a video that wasn't meant for my eyes. The clip ended, the screen going dark as the story moved on to something else, but my mind stayed frozen on that image. My hands tightened around my phone as I played it back, again and again, trying to convince myself that I had seen it wrong, that there was some other explanation. But there wasn't. I knew what I had just witnessed. It wasn't just a friendly dance. It wasn't innocent. Claire wasn't just on vacation with her friends. She was doing something else entirely, something I hadn't even let myself consider until now. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my heart hammering in my chest. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to hold on to the idea that this was still the woman I had trusted with everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was happening. Something I couldn't ignore. And it was only a matter of time before I found out exactly how far it went. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying that brief clip over and over again, dissecting every detail, every movement. My rational side tried to find an excuse, a justification, anything to contradict the conclusion forming in my head. Maybe it was just an innocent dance. Maybe the camera had caught the wrong angle. Maybe she was just caught up in the music, having fun, not thinking about how it might look. But deep down, I knew better. Claire had never danced with another man like that before. Not once in all our years together. That wasn't how a married woman danced with someone who wasn't her husband. That was intimacy, familiarity, something that had no place in our marriage. The next morning, I woke up exhausted, my mind still clouded by the images from the night before. I reached for my phone, half expecting a message from Claire, some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. She hadn't sent so much as a good morning text. I checked her location again. Still unavailable. My stomach twisted, and for the first time since she left, I felt something shift inside me. A cold, creeping certainty. Something was going on, and I was done pretending it wasn't. I didn't text her. I wanted to see how long it would take for her to reach out. Hours passed, the day dragging on in a haze of tension and restless energy. I went through the motions of work, but my mind wasn't there. My thoughts were trapped in an endless loop of suspicion and betrayal. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart lurched, only to sink when it wasn't her. When my screen finally lit up with Claire's name late in the afternoon, my hands clenched around my phone before I even opened the message. "Hey! Sorry, been super busy. Just been chilling by the pool all day. How's everything at home?" I stared at the words, the casual tone of it, like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't deliberately avoiding me, like she hadn't spent the previous night grinding against some stranger in a dark club. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to call her out right then and there, demand an explanation, force her to tell me the truth. But something stopped me. Confronting her over text would get me nowhere. She would deny it, twist it around, make me feel like I was being paranoid. No, if I was going to do this, I needed more than a grainy clip from a drunken vacation post. I forced myself to reply normally, mirroring her tone. "Glad you're having fun? Everything's fine here." No accusations, no hints of suspicion. If she was lying to me, I wanted her to feel safe enough to keep slipping up. I needed to know just how deep this went. That night I went digging. I started with her social media, scrolling through old posts, cross-referencing comments from her friends. I checked tagged photos, seeing if anything had been uploaded that she might not have control over. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I became. Her friends were posting, but she was barely in any of their pictures. If this trip was supposed to be a girls' getaway, why wasn't she with them? Then I went further. I searched for flights, looked up the hotel they were staying at, checked the nightlife in the area. I even checked the timestamps on her messages to me, comparing them to when she had been online. That's when I saw the pattern. Whenever I texted her, she had been active just moments before but wouldn't reply for hours. It was like she was deliberately waiting, making sure to put distance between her life there and the one she still had with me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a last-minute fling or a drunken mistake. Claire was being careful. She knew what she was doing. And worst of all, she didn't think I would ever find out. I put my phone down, staring at the dark screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had spent years building a life with this woman, believing that we were solid, that we had something real. And now, sitting alone in the house we had made together, I felt it all crumbling beneath me. But I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. If Claire thought she could play me for a fool, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The days dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. I forced myself to go through the motions, to act like everything was normal, but inside, I was unraveling. Claire's messages continued to be sporadic, her replies distant and empty. I stopped trying to reach out first, just to see if she would even notice, and unsurprisingly, she didn't. Hours would pass, sometimes an entire day, before she sent a brief, meaningless text. "Just got back from the beach, exhausted." Or, "Had the best dinner tonight, wish you were here." Lies. I knew now, without a doubt, that every word was a carefully crafted illusion. She didn't wish I was there. If she did, she wouldn't be turning off her location. She wouldn't be dodging my calls. She wouldn't have her body wrapped around some stranger in a nightclub. I became obsessed. I checked her friends' social media constantly, scrolling through stories, hunting for clues. Most of them were harmless, pictures of cocktails, sunset views, beach loungers, but I knew enough now to read between the lines. In the background of a group shot, I noticed an extra drink on the table, an untouched beer that none of her friends would have ordered. In another, the reflection in the window showed a silhouette that didn't belong to any of them. These were small things, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but to me, they were confirmation. Then, on the sixth night, I found what I was looking for. Another video, buried in the stories of a friend who clearly hadn't thought twice before posting it. It was late, close to midnight, and I was lying in bed, my phone gripped tightly in my hands, when I saw it. The camera moved through a dimly lit bar, capturing the clinking of glasses and the low hum of music. Then, for just a second, the lens landed on Claire. She was sitting in a booth, leaning in close to a man I had never seen before. He was tall, tan, wearing an expensive-looking button-down with the top few buttons undone. Claire's hand was on his arm, her body angled toward him, her smile wide and real, one I hadn't seen in months. I watched as she tilted her head back in laughter, exposing her neck, her fingers absently tracing a pattern on his sleeve. It was intimate. It was familiar. It was something she had stopped doing with me a long time ago. My whole body went cold. I played the video again, then again, each time hoping I had imagined it, that my mind was twisting reality into something worse. But it was real. It was undeniable. Claire wasn't just being distant. She wasn't just caught up in the excitement of a trip. She was with someone else. Right in the open. Not even trying to hide it. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, to smash it against the wall, to destroy something, anything, to match the way my insides felt like they were being torn apart. Instead, I sat there, staring at the screen, letting the truth sink in. She had chosen this. She had made a choice every single day since she left. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. And she thought I wouldn't find out. That was the part that burned the most. The sheer arrogance of it. The belief that she could play this game and return home like nothing had happened, slipping back into the life we had built together, as if she hadn't shattered it beyond repair. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for her to come home, full of excuses and empty apologies. No, I was going to make sure that when she stepped through that door, she would realize exactly what she had done. And she would regret it. Rage simmered inside me like a slow-burning fire, consuming every rational thought. I couldn't escape the images seared into my brain. Claire pressed against that stranger in the nightclub, her fingers teasing his sleeve in the bar, the way she looked at him like he was the only man in the room. It wasn't just lust. It was comfort. Familiarity. As if she had known him for more than just this trip, as if he had already taken a place in her life that once belonged to me. I felt sick thinking about how long this had really been going on. Had it started before she even left? Had she been planning this all along? I thought about all the times she had kissed me absent-mindedly before leaving for work, the nights she had been too tired, the moments when her mind had been somewhere else entirely. It was so obvious now, the signs I had ignored, the gut feeling I had silenced for months. I had been a fool, trusting her while she built a secret life behind my back. But now that I knew the truth, I wasn't going to let her come home and pretend like nothing had happened. I started planning. The house, our house, the one we had built together, would no longer be hers. The thought of her walking through that front door, dropping her bags, curling up on the couch like she hadn't just spent a week betraying me, I refused to let that happen. I had given her everything. I had been loyal, patient, loving, and she had thrown it away like it was nothing. I spent the next day going through our home, deciding what would stay and what would go. Every trace of Claire, her clothes, her perfume, the framed pictures of us smiling at some long-forgotten happiness, would be erased. I took down every photo of us, every reminder that we had once been something worth saving. Her closet, once overflowing with carefully curated outfits, was stripped bare. I packed everything into trash bags and left them by the door like discarded waste. Then I went further. I called the locks company and scheduled a change for the morning of her return. She would arrive to find herself locked out of the life she thought she could take for granted. I informed the bank to separate our accounts. I contacted a lawyer. Claire thought she was coming home to a husband who would never suspect a thing. Instead, she was coming home to the consequences of her actions. But the most satisfying part came when I decided she wouldn't just walk into a silent, empty house. No, that was too easy. She needed to feel the weight of her choices the moment she stepped through that door. And I had just the person who would help me deliver the final blow. I reached out to one of her friends, the one who had unknowingly given me the proof I needed. The one who had posted the nightclub video. I had always been civil with her, but we had never been particularly close. Still, she picked up my call on the first ring, her voice cautious, uncertain. And when I told her what I knew, when I asked her for the truth, the real truth, there was a long, heavy silence. And then she told me everything. Claire hadn't just met that man on vacation. She had been seeing him for months. He was someone she had met through work, someone who had been more than just a fling. The trip wasn't about spending time with friends. It was about spending a week with him, away from prying eyes, away from me. Her friends had known, at least some of them, but no one had wanted to be the one to tell me. And now, with my voice calm and steady, I asked her to be the one to help me make sure Claire would never forget what she had done. She hesitated, but I could hear the guilt in her voice. She agreed. And just like that, the stage was set. Claire thought she was coming home to the life she had left behind. But when she walked through that door, she would realize that life no longer existed. And neither did her place in it. The night before Claire's return, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind consumed with images of her wrapped around another man, her hands tracing patterns on his arms the way she used to do with me. The betrayal was no longer a distant suspicion but a brutal reality, one I couldn't escape no matter how much I tried to suppress it. My thoughts spiraled, alternating between anger and cold calculation. There was no more room for heartbreak, no space left for sadness. All that remained was the need to make sure she faced the consequences of what she had done. She had spent her time away acting as if I didn't exist, as if the vows we had made were nothing more than empty words. Now, she was coming home, expecting to step back into the life she had so easily discarded. But she was in for a rude awakening. By morning, I had set everything in motion. The locks had been changed, the house stripped of any trace of her existence, and her belongings, clothes, shoes, makeup, framed pictures of us that once decorated the walls, were all packed into trash bags and set outside on the front lawn. It was a fitting image. She had treated our marriage like something disposable, something she could toss aside the moment something more exciting came along. Now, she would see how it felt to be discarded just as easily. The bedroom we had once shared, the closet filled with the outfits she had meticulously picked out, the bathroom counter lined with her perfumes and skincare products, it was all gone, erased as if she had never been here in the first place. This was my home now. She was just another stranger passing through. The hours crawled by as I waited, the tension in my chest tightening with every passing minute. I imagined her sitting on the plane, her mind still lost in the illusion she had built, thinking she could come back and play the devoted wife. She probably believed she had been careful, that her secrets were still safe, that I was still the clueless husband waiting eagerly for her return. The thought made my jaw clench. She had no idea that her lies had already unraveled, that I had spent the last few days preparing for her downfall. She had planned her betrayal with precision, but she had made one fatal mistake: she underestimated me. When the Uber finally pulled up in the driveway, I watched from the window, my heart pounding with something between rage and satisfaction. Claire stepped out, her skin glowing from the sun, her hair falling in effortless waves, looking every bit like a woman who had just spent a week indulging in a fantasy life. She moved with ease, reaching for her suitcase, her expression relaxed, completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down around her. Then she saw the bags. Her steps faltered, her brow furrowed as she took in the sight of her belongings piled up like garbage. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by something else: panic. I stepped outside just as she reached for her phone, no doubt to call me, to ask what was happening, to spin some excuse. But she didn't get the chance. The moment she looked up and saw me standing there, she froze. For the first time in a long time, Claire looked uncertain. Not the confident, smooth-talking woman who always had an answer for everything. No, she looked like someone who knew, deep down, that the game was over. I could see it in her eyes, the rapid calculations, the desperate attempt to figure out how much I knew, how much damage had already been done. And then, just as I had expected, she put on the act. She forced a laugh, shaking her head as if this was all some kind of misunderstanding. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice light, casual, as if she hadn't spent the last week betraying me, as if she had no idea why she was standing in front of a house that no longer belonged to her. It was almost impressive, the way she tried to pretend, to keep the mask in place even when the evidence of her destruction was right in front of her. But I wasn't here to play her game. I stepped aside, revealing the last person she expected to see, her friend, the one who had unknowingly given me the proof I needed. Claire's entire expression shifted in an instant. The color drained from her face, her fake confidence crumbling as she looked between us, realizing, too late, that her lies had unraveled. There was no way out of this. She couldn't charm her way through it, couldn't manipulate the situation to her advantage. She had been caught, and now, she had to face the consequences. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths, until I finally spoke, my voice calm, steady. "She told me everything," I said, watching as Claire flinched at the weight of those words. "I know about him. I know about the lies. I know about the months you spent sneaking around, thinking I'd never find out." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, Claire had nothing to say. No excuses, no carefully crafted explanations. Just silence. I took a slow step forward, keeping my gaze locked on hers, making sure she felt every ounce of what she had done. "You made your choice," I continued, my tone devoid of emotion. "And now you have to live with it." She searched my face for something, weakness, hesitation, some sign that she could salvage what was left. But there was nothing left to salvage. She had spent the past week tearing our marriage apart. Now, she was standing in the ruins, and for the first time, she had no one to blame but herself. Claire's breathing became uneven, her shoulders tensed as she stood in the driveway, surrounded by the physical proof that she had lost everything. The moment stretched, heavy and suffocating, as her eyes darted between me, the trash bags filled with her belongings, and her friend, the one who had finally exposed the truth. I could see the way her mind was racing, scrambling to find a way out of this, a way to twist the situation in her favor. But there was no escape, no version of this where she could rewrite what had already been set in stone. The silence between us was deafening, and for the first time, I could see the cracks forming in the persona she had so carefully crafted. Then, as if flipping a switch, she tried to regain control. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted slightly, and she let out a small, incredulous laugh, the same laugh I had once loved but now saw for what it really was, a calculated defense mechanism. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head as if this was some kind of elaborate joke. "What is all this? Why are my things outside? What's she doing here?" She gestured toward her friend, her voice laced with just enough forced confusion to make it seem like she was the victim in all of this. I didn't blink. I didn't react. I had already prepared for this. "She told me the truth," I said, my voice controlled, unwavering. "She told me about him. About how this trip wasn't just a getaway with the girls. About how you've been seeing him for months. How you spent the last week with him while lying to my face." I let the words sink in, watching as Claire's expression flickered, just for a split second, with something that looked like fear. Not the fear of losing me, not the fear of breaking my heart, but the fear of getting caught, the fear of losing control over the carefully spun web of lies she had been maintaining. Her lips parted, ready to launch into some desperate attempt at damage control, but I wasn't finished. "Your location was off the entire time," I continued, stepping closer, forcing her to look at me, to see the cold certainty in my eyes. You barely spoke to me all week. But you were in that club, weren't you? Dancing with him. You were in that bar, touching him the way you used to touch me. You were laughing, smiling, forgetting that you had a husband back home who trusted you. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake, but the weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating any excuse she might have been preparing. Claire's face twisted, a flash of frustration crossing her features as she realized she had nowhere to run. So what? She snapped, her voice sharp now, defensive. You were spying on me? You were stalking my location, checking up on me like some paranoid. Paranoid? I cut in, a humorless chuckle escaping before I could stop it. No, Claire. Paranoia is when you suspect something without proof. But I have proof. I have the videos, the messages, the conversations your friends had when they thought I wouldn't hear. This isn't paranoia. This is reality. And the reality is you cheated. You lied. You threw away everything we had for a vacation fling that wasn't even a fling, because let's be honest, you didn't meet him there. He was already in your life before you ever stepped on that plane, wasn't he? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The way her jaw clenched, the way her nostrils flared just slightly, told me everything I needed to know. The Claire I had loved, the woman I had spent years building a life with, wasn't standing in front of me. What stood before me now was a stranger, someone who had made a choice long before this moment, someone who had simply underestimated the consequences. I took a step back, creating distance between us, and gestured toward the bags. Your things are here. The locks have been changed. The bank has been informed. And the divorce papers are already in motion. The words came easily, final and resolute. You don't live here anymore, Claire. You don't have a husband anymore. All you have left is the life you chose. So I hope he was worth it. For the first time, real panic flashed across her face. Wait, she said quickly, her voice cracking slightly as she reached out as if to touch me, to somehow rewind the last 10 minutes. You don't have to do this. We can talk about this, please, just let's. I stepped away before her hand could reach me. No, I said simply. We're done talking. You talked plenty when you were with him. You just never thought I'd hear it. I turned to go back inside, but before I did, I looked at her one last time, not with anger, not with sadness, but with a calm detachment that let her know she no longer had any power here. You made this choice, Claire. Now live with it. And then, without another word, I walked inside and shut the door behind me. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Claire's voice before she could protest further. I stood there for a moment, gripping the doorknob, my breathing steady, my pulse finally slowing. I had expected more from her, more resistance, more pleading, maybe even tears. But there had been none of that, only a weak, last-ditch attempt to manipulate the situation before she realized that, for the first time, she had lost control. And that was the part that satisfied me the most. She hadn't fought for me. She hadn't begged for forgiveness. Because deep down, she knew there was nothing left to fight for. She knew what she had done. And now, she had to live with the wreckage of it. I turned away from the door, stepping into the house that no longer felt tainted by her presence. The weight I had been carrying for days, the anger, the suspicion, the sickening uncertainty, had finally lifted. I had spent the last week consumed by the question of how I would handle this moment, if I would crumble, if I would break, if I would let her lies destroy me. But now that it was done, now that she was on the other side of that door with her life in ruins, I felt nothing. No sorrow, no regret, no urge to reconsider. Just quiet. A cold, satisfying quiet that told me I had made the right choice. I walked through the house, taking in the emptiness, the stillness of it now that her presence had been erased. The living room, once filled with the scent of her perfume, felt larger, untouched, like it was mine again. The bedroom, no longer littered with her clothes, her makeup, her presence, was now a place where I could breathe. I had spent years in this house believing it was ours, believing we had built something strong, something lasting. But now I saw the truth. It had always been mine. I had been the one who stayed faithful, the one who honored our vows, the one who worked to keep us together. She had simply been passing through, waiting for the moment when something more exciting came along. And when it did, she hadn't hesitated. I sat down on the couch, letting my body relax for the first time in days. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. Claire. The name flashed like a ghost from another life, a final attempt to cling to something that no longer existed. I didn't bother reading the message. I deleted it without opening it, without hesitation. She had nothing left to say that I needed to hear. The evening stretched on, the weight of what had just happened settling into my bones. I thought about what came next, the divorce proceedings, the inevitable fallout, the explanations to friends and family who would ask what had happened. But for the first time, I wasn't dreading it. The worst part was already over. Claire was gone. The lies were exposed. And I was free. Later that night, as I sat in my now empty home, I allowed myself to imagine the future, not the one I had planned with Claire, but the one I would build without her. A future where I didn't have to wonder, didn't have to question, didn't have to constantly search for the truth in someone else's eyes. A future that belonged to me alone. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was going to be just fine. The night after Claire was gone, I expected to feel something, anger, sadness, maybe even regret. But instead, I felt nothing at all. It was as if my body had shut down every emotion that had been building inside me over the past week. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the humiliation, it had all come to a head in the driveway when I told her she no longer had a place in my life. And now, sitting alone in the house that once belonged to both of us, I felt like I was finally breathing clean air again. There was no longer a shadow hanging over me, no longer a creeping sense of doubt every time my phone buzzed or she came home late. It was over. She was out of my life, and for the first time, I realized how much lighter I felt without her in it. Claire, however, didn't seem to accept that. She had spent the night trying to reach me, sending text after text, each one more desperate than the last. At first, they were defensive, full of hollow excuses and frantic justifications. This isn't what you think. I was drunk. It didn't mean anything. But when I didn't respond, the messages changed. The confidence faded, replaced by guilt, then desperation. Please, can we just talk? I made a mistake. I don't want to lose you. By midnight, she was calling, her name flashing across my screen over and over again like some pathetic alarm clock I had no intention of answering. Eventually, she stopped, and for the first time in days, I slept soundly. The next morning, I woke up to another barrage of messages, but this time, I noticed something different, one from Claire's so-called vacation fling. A name I had never seen before, a number I didn't recognize. The text was short, almost smug in its casualness. Guess she's your problem now. Good luck. I stared at the words for a long time, trying to understand the full weight of what they meant. Had he thrown her aside already? Had she realized, too late, that she had burned her entire life down for something meaningless? Whatever the case, it wasn't my concern anymore. I deleted the message without replying, just as I had with hers. Claire was no longer my problem. By noon, my lawyer had already drafted the divorce papers, and I made sure to have them sent to her immediately. I wanted this done. I wanted her name off my accounts, off my home, out of my life. There was no point in dragging it out, no point in listening to whatever sad attempts at reconciliation she might try next. She had made her choice the moment she decided to betray me. The only thing left for me to do was to make sure she faced the full weight of that decision. And that's exactly what happened. Claire's calls slowed over the next few days, her texts becoming less frequent, her messages turning into long-winded apologies that I never read past the first few words. She begged to meet, to talk, to explain herself, but there was nothing left to say. Whatever she was looking for, redemption, closure, one last chance to manipulate me, she wasn't going to find it. She had already done enough damage, and I refused to give her the satisfaction of thinking I would ever let her back in. A week after she left, I found myself standing in what used to be our bedroom, taking in the emptiness, the stillness. It was strange, looking at a space that had once held so many memories and realizing how little of it actually mattered now. I had thought I would feel grief, but all I felt was relief. She was gone. And with her, every lie, every secret, every piece of the life I had once thought was real. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to someone who didn't respect me. I wasn't waiting for a text that would never come, or a call full of excuses. I wasn't second-guessing my instincts, wondering if I was just being paranoid. I was free. And the best part? I had no intention of ever looking back. Weeks passed, and the echoes of Claire's betrayal slowly faded into the background. At first, there were still remnants of her in my life, legal paperwork, forgotten emails, old memories that crept in at the worst times, but each day, I wiped away another piece of what we had once been. The divorce papers were signed and processed faster than I expected, a testament to how little there was left to fight for. Claire barely put up a struggle. Maybe she knew she had no leverage, or maybe she had finally realized that there was nothing she could say to change what she had done. Either way, the end came swiftly, without the grand confrontation she might have hoped for. No final arguments, no desperate attempts at redemption. Just a signature on a line that severed every tie between us. Claire moved out of state shortly after. Whether it was to chase after the man she had thrown our marriage away for or just to escape the humiliation, I never bothered to find out. The moment she walked out of my life, she ceased to exist to me. Her messages stopped, her calls went unanswered, and over time, even the mutual friends we once shared stopped mentioning her. It was as if she had disappeared entirely, just another name in my past, another lesson learned the hard way. Surprisingly, I didn't feel broken. I had expected to grieve, to go through the painful process of mourning a relationship that had spanned years, but the truth was, I had already done my grieving long before she ever walked out the door. The moment I saw that video, the moment I realized who she truly was, the love I had for her had died right then and there. What was left wasn't heartbreak, it was just the cold acceptance of reality. She had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. I focused on rebuilding my life, on reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost in the years I spent being the husband Claire had taken for granted. I traveled, something we had always talked about but never done because Claire always had an excuse. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from while trying to keep a marriage alive that was already long dead. I started taking better care of myself, putting effort into things I had neglected. And most importantly, I learned how to be happy alone. One night, months later, I found myself sitting on my back porch with a drink in my hand, staring up at the sky. It was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. No anxiety, no nagging doubts, no weight pressing down on my chest. Just a simple, undeniable feeling of freedom. Claire had once been my entire world, the person I had built a future around. But looking back now, I realized she had only been a chapter in my story, not the whole book. And that chapter was closed. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for karma to catch up to her. She was nothing to me now, just a distant memory, a mistake I had survived. And as I sat there, breathing in the cool night air, I realized something else. I had won. Because while she had thrown away everything for a temporary thrill, I had walked away with my dignity, my self-respect, and a future that no longer included someone who had never truly valued me. For the first time in a long time, I was free. And I was finally, truly happy.